But what if my true self sucks? What if my true self is evil, abusive, or just lazy? Should I then want to become my true self? Whenever I'm writing or talking about authenticity, self-actualization, and becoming your true self, I get two types of questions. First one, what is a self? What does true self even mean? Can the self be true? And the second type of question is the one that I started with. What if my true self sucks? What if it's evil, negative? Should I want to become my true self? Right now, I just want to briefly address the first type of question because my main focus is on the second type, on addressing whether true self can be negative. But quickly, let's go over the first. We could call it a more philosophical question. What is a self? Well, most people who ask what is a self and what does true self even mean are engaging in mental masturbation, pardon my language. I see it as an escape from the responsibility of being authentic, the responsibility to be authentic. Those are valid philosophical questions, don't get me wrong. Those are some of the most important philosophical questions. Does the self exist? What is the self? But if you think you truly care about those questions from a intellectual/philosophical perspective, rather than seeing what it means for your life and how to live it right now, then go read Nietzsche or Kierkegaard's writings on the topic and see if you truly care. And you know how you will see? You will see by the fact that your head will start hurting from the complexity of the topic and the labyrinth that you put yourself in by reading on the philosophy of the self by writers who took the matter to great lengths and great depths. So read and you will quickly realize if you truly do have that philosophical and intellectual curiosity to pursue the question. But I think in reality, when us quote-unquote regular people who want to live better lives are talking about the true self, we are talking about something that is way more easy to understand. You cannot tell me that you have never felt fake and inauthentic in your life. You can not tell me that you have never said or done something that deep inside you knew wasn't true to who you are or who you're trying to become. You cannot tell me that you have never felt real in your life. So authenticity and inauthenticity exist. That's all you need to know when we are having these conversations about the true self. So yeah, although I'm a philosophy nerd and I have read those works by Nietzsche and Kierkegaard diving into the issue of what the self is, I still don't appreciate asking abstract questions for the sake of avoiding answers that would demand that we take some action, some authentic action. Now, for the second question, which is the focus for today. Can your true self be bad, negative, evil, lazy? The short answer is no. But of course, we are here not for the short answer. Of course, there are psychopaths in every society, so let's leave some room for the possibility that there are people whose true self is actually evil. But psychopaths are not asking me this question. A lot of you are. Now, for the longer answer. A good way to explain why your true self cannot be bad is to look at an idea or a theory by which your true self could be bad. When we show how this idea is wrong, we will proceed to a both more encouraging and more realistic view of the self. And it's rare to get at the same time something that is more encouraging and more realistic. The idea by which your true self can be bad is the Freudian notion of the superego. According to Freud, which I'm sure all of you heard of, the founder of psychoanalysis and probably the single most influential individual in the history of psychology, your superego is your conscience. According to him, that's part of your mind which guides your sense of right and wrong. And according to Freud, superego is the internalization of the wishes, demands, and ideals of the father and mother. Now, at first, it seems like a sound, reasonable idea. So, your sense of right and wrong, your conscious, that is your superego, is the internalization of the wishes, demands, and ideals of the father and mother. Why not, right? And it's an idea that's been accepted by many for a long time. But let's see how one small addition to this previous statement can make this idea disturbing, to be quite honest. According to Freud, we said superego is primarily the internalization of the wishes, demands, and ideals of the father and mother, whoever they happen to be. But what if your father or mother are criminals, or drug addicts, or abusive alcoholics? Then what kind of conscience do you have? Then what does your superego consist of? Or let's say you have, quote unquote, just rigid, moralizing parents who hate creativity and fun and artistic expression. What kind of conscience do you have? Then what is your inner guide? If your superego is shaped by their sense of right and wrong, their values, and their standards, and their wishes, what kind of person would you become? If we agreed with the idea of the superego, or let's say that we agree, then not only is it possible to have a negative true self, but then it would take a couple of generations to end up in a world full of negative, evil true selves. But we know that's not the case. What about millions and millions of noble, charitable, respectable, inspiring people who grew up with objectively bad parents? If Freud's idea of the superego was entirely true, we would be living in a much different, much darker world. But Freud wasn't entirely wrong. The superego exists, and it's an immensely strong force in our lives. But it's not the only thing that guides us. In fact, many prominent thinkers disagreed with Freud. It's important to point out, I said many people agreed with Freud for a long time, but also his greatest students or collaborators in the school of psychoanalysis, Carl Jung, Alfred Adler, and Otto Rank, all disagreed with Freud on the idea of the superego. Another prominent thinker of the 20th century, Erich Fromm, wrote at length about his disagreements with Freud's idea of the superego. But this time, I want to share one specific idea that is probably the most straightforward and encouraging while opposing the Freudian superego, and that's intrinsic conscience. There is also another element in conscience, or if you like, another kind of conscience, and this is the intrinsic conscience. This is based upon the unconscious and pre-conscious perception of our own nature, of our own destiny, of our own capacities, of our own call in life. It insists that we be true to our inner nature and that we do not deny it out of weakness or for advantage or for any other reason, said Abraham Maslow in the Towards the Psychology of Being. And another one. All the evidence that we have indicates that it is reasonable to assume in practically every human being and certainly in almost every newborn baby that there is an active will towards health, an impulse towards growth, or towards the actualization of human potentialities. Abraham Maslow in The Farther Reaches of Human Nature. You probably heard of Abraham Maslow in one of the boring psychology classes in school where you were taught his idea of the hierarchy of needs. An idea that's so poorly presented in formal education, presented in an incomplete manner. And by the way, Maslow never drew the pyramid that you saw in school, but that's another story. Abraham Maslow is more than what you heard of him. While psychology of Freud and most of those inspired by him was dealing with investigating psychologically and mentally sick people and trying to bring them back to what we would call baseline or normality, which it's a noble pursuit, Maslow spent his life exploring the highest possibilities and the farther reaches of human nature. Intrinsic conscious is just one piece of the big puzzle that Maslow was trying to put together. Movement towards self-actualization, full humanness, and transcendence. According to Maslow and the rest of the humanistic psychologists, there is an inherent goodness in all people and the will towards growth and development in a healthy way. So what does this intrinsic consciousness do? What is its role? Intrinsic consciousness insists that you be true to your inner nature. And what does your inner nature do? It calls you to grow, develop, and to try to actualize your potential. Because even though not all of us have the same potentials, all of us have some potential in us. Therefore, intrinsic consciousness, once again, insists, not only asks, it insists that you do not deny your inner nature out of fear, weakness, laziness, or for short-term gain. So the answer is no. Your true self cannot be bad, lazy, evil, abusive, etc. Because there is something in you which is part of your inner true nature that is inherently good and demands you to develop in a healthy way. But what I find equally or even more interesting than the idea of intrinsic consciousness itself is what happens when we don't listen to our intrinsic consciousness. There are, of course, those extremely rare cases where people follow their intrinsic consciousness and inner nature since childhood and never stop following it. We know that Mozart and Beethoven started playing music since they were around 3 years old, and music remained their passion, calling throughout their lives. So artists and athletes are most common examples of people who follow their intrinsic conscience throughout their lives. Less celebrated and popular but equally valuable people are teachers and educators, because we see in some of them this pattern of following their intrinsic conscience throughout their lives. But most of us ignore intrinsic conscience for at least a part of our lives. And it's not rare that people spend their whole life ignoring it, opposing their inner nature. It's the definition of a wasted life. Life where you completely betrayed yourself and your soul and everything that you could have been. It's a tragic life. But back to what happens when you ignore your intrinsic conscience. Because we see there are few who follow it all the way, but most of us at points leave our destined path. Maslow says, he who belies his talent, the born painter who sells stockings instead, the intelligent man who lives a stupid life, the man who sees truth and keeps his mouth shut, the coward who gives up his courage. All these people perceive in a deep way that they have done wrong to themselves, and they despise themselves for it. So maybe Maslow didn't give the most relevant examples for our time, saying the born painter who sells stockings instead. Maybe we could say the born artist who is trying to sell people courses on TikTok on how to make 50k per month. I don't know. But those people who ignore their potential, their destiny, either out of fear, laziness, or sacrificing it for short-term gain, those people perceive, once again, in a deep way that they have done wrong to themselves and they despise themselves for it. So no, don't worry, your true self cannot be bad. But if you have a bad relationship with yourself, maybe you should question if you've been ignoring your potential and your calling for too long. If you've been betraying your intrinsic conscious. Maslow, just like Carl Jung, for example, believed that for the vast majority of people, the source of neurosis, that is depression, anxiety, obsessive disorders, etc., wasn't of biological nature, that they weren't sick in the sense of having a brain disease, that they weren't sick in a medical sense. Most people, according to Maslow and Carl Jung, most people suffered from neurosis precisely because of not following their intrinsic conscience, not answering their calling in life, which leads to an empty life. This opens up a whole new topic, which some of you know I've been writing about and I plan on making multiple videos about as well. And that's a more nuanced and expanded view of mental and psychological health. But for now, just know that your true self cannot be bad. However, if you ignore your true self, you will suffer deeply. Thank you.